Welcome to the Advance Your Art podcast, where we talk about the journey from artist to entrepreneur and everything in between. You've worked hard to hone your craft. Now take it to the next level with tips, techniques, strategies, and routines used by successful artists to grow their businesses and careers. Now, let's get started and have some fun with your host, Yuri Cataldo.
Good morning, Brooke. Welcome to the show. How are you today?
I am wonderful. Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming on.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to start off this morning by asking you, how do you describe yourself and what you do?
Well, it's funny that you word it like that because I am very much a different person from what I produce, but I mean, generally I'm a fine art photographer and writer, and I'm tending to produce very dark, surreal, whimsical works. But then me as a person, I'm also a motivational speaker. So I'm sort of like this really odd mix of happy and bubbly and dark and creepy.
That's a very interesting dichotomy.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think it's one part of your personality coming out in each individual thing?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, all my life I've been really optimistic and sort of annoying to all the people around me because of that. And I've always felt like that's my true self. But then I also love dark, creepy art. And that's just always been this other part of myself that really doesn't mix well with the personality side of things. But it does make for an interesting life because I can sort of have this one persona that really is me, that's happy. And then that fuels my desire to create, which is much more, I would say, sometimes depressing and sad and creepy. But yeah, they work together.
Mm-hmm. They definitely do. I was looking at your portfolio, and your photographs are beautiful and very, very thought-provoking. And you're right. I didn't really, because I didn't stare at them for a very long time. But you're right. They do enter more of a darker side.
Yeah.
I'd like to start by asking about your childhood. So you grew up in Pennsylvania, and I'm curious to see if you think that maybe where you grew up kind of influenced what you're doing now.
I think it definitely did. And I think that a lot of people will have that same reaction to say that wherever you grew up had some influence, whether it was direct or not. I grew up in a really rural area with lots of farms around and sort of like Amish central. So I'm not Amish or anything like that, but I grew up with lots of horse and buggies coming down the streets and things like that. Mm-hmm. And I think that I always had this sense that nature was my favorite place, that being next to a stream or in a tree or in a forest was always just my happy place. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because, I grew up the same childhood as my sister, and she had just the opposite reaction. She couldn't wait to move to a city and get out of the small town life. But I was always really inspired by it. So, interestingly, my sister, who is also an artist, tends to create pieces that are much more industrial looking. And then I'm creating images that are very much rooted in nature. So I think that where I grew up had a positive impact on me, and I've always been inspired by solitude and nature and the way that you can connect that way.
Mm-hmm. So you and I had a little bit of a similar upbringing in the fact that I grew up very close to Shipshewana, Indiana.
Oh, yeah.
So very familiar with traffic jams happening because horse and buggies are on the road, and and that separate just community where I always loved it because I felt like I could just time travel back to the 1800s.
Yes, me too.
Exactly, people spoke used different terms and different language, and then did everything by hand.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, and there's some kind of beautiful craftsmanship and serenity that is with that, and also it's also kind of annoying in a certain sense, just because when you're trying to get to work or trying to get to school, and there's somebody in a horse and buggy, and you're like, really, man, come on, just
exactly. But I grew up wishing that I was Amish, actually, because I loved that sort of timeless aspect of it.
Have you ever read any of the romantic Amish novels?
No, but I should.
Okay, you should definitely look into this. I have never actually read them, but the last time I was in Indiana, I stopped into this place called Essenhouse, which is like the Disney World of the Amish in Indiana, and there's a huge selection of romantic Amish novels.
Cool. I wrote it down.
That's as much as I know about them. I definitely think you should look into that.
Will do.
So you decided then to go to school, is it Temple?
Yeah, which is in Philadelphia, actually.
Okay, so Temple. So you just kind of traveled down further in the state. Why did you then decide to head over to Philadelphia?
Well, I just needed to go somewhere in state so I could afford it. And that ended up being Temple because they had a film program. So I was searching for anywhere that I could actually get into because I was not a good student despite my best efforts. And so I went to Temple where they had a film program and an English literature program. And I wanted those two majors when I went to college. So I made sure that I would have a well-rounded education there.
Were there kind of things that you were taught, like certain classes you took or different professors that you ran into that ultimately helped you long term that you didn't realize at the time?
Definitely. I mean, I think honestly my whole career there was prepping me for what I would do outside of college and still does because without realizing it, I went to college and studied storytelling. You know, I thought that I was studying the technical aspects of filmmaking and then learning how to pull out symbols from literature and creative writing and stuff like that. But really, every single class that I took served the purpose of teaching me how to tell stories visually or through writing, which are both massively helpful in creating any kind of art. So I went into it, and I remember taking a lot of cinematography classes and screenwriting classes and things like that. And they were really valuable in the moment for what I was trying to do. But now I still pull on those classes to figure out, well, what's the best lighting and what's the best story that I can tell in the most succinct way possible, which screenwriting is amazing for that. So I still learn from my classes that I took ages ago.
That's wonderful. That's great that you're able to pull from those. So when was it in college that you discovered your love for photography?
It really wasn't in college, actually. I had taken a photo class in high school that I very much did not enjoy. And I think part of why I didn't enjoy it is because I wasn't naturally good at it. I had taken this class thinking it was going to be really easy and I would just pick up the camera and take a great picture. And that didn't happen. And the class was also a black and white film class. And we weren't supposed to shoot people. So it was all inanimate objects and landscapes and things like that. So I started to become really disenchanted with this idea of photography that I was being given. So that's kind of why I went into filmmaking, because I thought, well, if I can't do what I want in a photo, then at least I could do it in a film. So I went into college with that mindset. And it wasn't until the very, very end of my college career, like the last 2 weeks, that a friend called me up, and we were living in different states at the time. And she had said to me, you know, we don't see each other and you're about to graduate college, so you're going to have more free time. So let's start taking self-portraits and then send them to each other, and we'll just, you know, it'll be a fun thing that we could do. So we did. And then about 2 weeks in, she quit and she was like, I don't like this anymore. And I just fell in love with it, this freedom that I found in photography.
Well, that's wonderful. So is that ultimately why you got involved and chose to stick with self-portraits?
That's part of it. I also moved to Los Angeles very soon after I graduated college, and I, you know, had these dreams of being a big time director or something like that. And then very quickly realized that with filmmaking, not only did I not want to live in Los Angeles long term, but also just the process of clawing your way up the ladder seemed really unappealing to me. And I was also disenchanted with how much your idea gets lost when you make a film. It takes so long to bring it to life, and there's such a big crew and so many people to go through, that I really liked the immediacy and the power that I had in photography to create my vision exactly as I want it in one day.
When was it that moment where you decided then switch over full time and make it more of a career?
It was kind of funny, actually. I was working as a receptionist, and I had this really fun routine where every morning I would get up at about 5 a.m. and I would do my photo shoot, and then I would go into work and I would edit my photo all throughout the day at my desk. And then around lunchtime, my coworkers started like learning that I had a photo every day. So they would come behind my desk and see what I was working on at lunchtime. And it was this really fun tradition of like more motivation for me to get up early and get it done. And they weren't great photos, but I was producing something. So that's what I was doing. And then I remember very distinctly one woman who I was friends with at this office. She said, I've seen way worse things in galleries. You should just try to put your work in a gallery. And I was like, oh, I never thought about that. It didn't occur to me that photography could be a way of earning money. Mm-hmm. So that's when I decided, well, okay, why not? I had only been doing photography for 6 months at that point. So I knew that I was still very young in my career, but I thought, it can't hurt to write to some galleries. So I ended up writing to about 100 galleries in the first week that I decided I was going to pursue this. And I heard nothing back, maybe just a couple of no's, and that was it, like literally one-word emails that just said no. And so I started to learn that it was going to be a much more difficult process than I originally thought to start a career.
How long was it then from when you first had this idea to get into galleries till you got your first bit of photos in a gallery?
Well, it wasn't actually that long, but it was a little bit deceptive. So I would say it was about June 2009 that I decided I was going to start pursuing galleries. And then in September that year, I finally got an email from a gallery saying that they would look at my work.
Okay.
So I brought my work in. I brought in 10 prints that my friend printed off of her home computer, and I showed them to the gallery. And I remember they made 2 piles of prints, one with 1 picture and the other with 9 pictures. And they said, we don't like these 9 pictures that you brought in, but we do like this 1 picture. So if you can create a series based on this image, then we will give you a show at our gallery. So for the next few months, I got to work creating a new series, and I showed them, and they agreed to display it. And then in February that next year, 2010, I had my first show opening. And it was at that time that I quit my job, and I thought I was going to make it big. So it was about a year after I started photography that I got my first show. Mm-hmm. But, that show cost $4,000 and I didn't sell anything. So whether it was a success or not is a different story.
Sure. I'm curious on that. So after that moment then where you had your first show and you didn't make anything from it, what were you thinking after that?
I was thinking, oh crap, this is not good. I was also really uplifted by it. Like I didn't expect to get a show necessarily. So that in and of itself was a huge success for me. And I have this uncanny ability to see the tiniest little triumphs as the biggest successes. Mm-hmm. So that works out in my favor because I have this blind trust in myself, perhaps when I shouldn't. So I went on thinking, well, I already have all these prints and the show is going to be over soon. So I took those same prints to a whole bunch of different gallery shows that whole year. So I started entering juried shows where it would be big group shows where they would say, okay, we're going to take, 25 different artists and you can put a couple of prints in the show. And usually you would pay like $25, $50 to get into the show. Mm-hmm. So I did that for a while and I ended up having 13 gallery shows that first year, but they were all paid juried shows. So I would take those same prints to all these shows and just hope that some would sell. And eventually I sold maybe like 4 that year, but it still didn't cover the cost of the first show. But thankfully, because I did all of those tiny shows that year, I got the attention of a bigger gallery who was willing to represent my work. So that happened at the end of my first year of being professional, I guess you could say.
Great. And then how has it evolved since then? Are you still, with your photography, do you still go the